Welcome to Future Ready live from the Gartner Finance Conference here in National Harbor, Maryland. And I'm here with two excellent speakers to give us the highlights from this conference, starting with Marko Horvat, who is a Vice President of the CFO Content. And then there's Tim Traud, the SVP of Finance at Jabil. Tim is also one of our volunteers, and he's leading, or will be leading, the the Regional Engagement Group for AICPA-SEMA. So he's covering the Americas and has been an active volunteer with us for plenty of years. So we're honored to catch up to you here, Tim. So with that, we're going to cover, we're in the middle of day 2, so we're kind of in the closing side of this. But what are some of the big highlights that you've seen? And Marko, I want to start with you. Obviously, you're part of the Gartner team. So tell us about what's sticking out for you guys right now as we go into this.
Yeah, so when we were putting together the agenda for the conference, really the thing that stuck out a lot was this whole idea that we've been through this cycle of continuous disruption, right? So it seems like we've been on this edge of a business cycle change forever, right? Is a recession going to happen? Is it not going to happen? Like, how deep is it going to be, et cetera? And then, in the meantime, we had, this generative AI thing that came out of nowhere, right? It seems like all of a sudden it was 10 years in the future, then it became like 10 weeks into the future. And then we had this banking crisis that sort of hit us. And so there's just been this continuous amount of change that's been sort of expected and unexpected. And dealing with that change in a productive way, and how do you position your finance teams for it and your organization for that, has been sort of the key focus of the organization, or of the agenda here. And it seems to be resonating, hopefully, with our attendees.
Absolutely. I think what we see is, with all of the items you mentioned, in addition to the pandemic, do you come back to work? Do you not come back to work? And then incorporate that with all of the change in technology. How do you incorporate it? How do you move it forward? People are uneasy about the technology. And so it has absolutely resonated at the conference as we talk about the different technologies, how to go about it, but also the people part of it as well.
Right. And I think that's really the key part of it too. It's, Gartner is very much into technology. We sort of have a reputation in that space. But I think it was really sort of touching at the keynote, where when we set the tone, it kind of reminded everyone, like, look, it's not about the robots, it's not about the computers. Like, all those are great, but those are there to augment our experience. And really, at the end of the day, when you think about the role of the CFO, right, and finance leaders, we lead people, right? And organizations are led by people, and having like that people-first mentality, that human side of the CFO, is still incredibly important, even in this like robotic, AI-generated, computers are going to take over the world sort of future.
Yeah, and I would say it's actually, it's still important, if not more important, because, as accounting and finance folks, it's easy to get caught up on the numbers, but at the end of the day, you've got to have the good people, and you've got to continue to develop people and not put so much of a focus on the technology that you forget about the people, how to grow them, how to deal with change fatigue.
Right, and create an environment, right? Because we had COVID that was so disruptive, and then we've had all these like disruption after disruption. It's almost become the norm. But to like build resiliency within your organization and build a culture where people feel like they matter, and that they're as much a part of the future as all this technology, as all these changing workflows and all of that stuff. I think that's incredibly important.
And maybe even more important in this age of the talent pipeline issues that we're facing. So obviously the profession's working on a lot of things to try to increase that pipeline, but it's number one issue for our future of finance is talent, right? Number 2 tends to be finance transformation, continuous, as you guys said. And we talk about the notion that it's like waves of change, but the waves seem to be getting bigger and coming faster. And I think I've heard that over this last couple of days, and that's exactly what our future finance group has said. Then the third issue tends to be the need for new skills. And you guys had a lot of stuff talking about that as well. And then you've got, like you said, inflation, recession, DEI, ESG, like all these. So one of the things is back to that whole notion that our group said, it's not like any one of these issues is big, but they're all happening and they're all hitting the CFO office.
Right.
So talk a little bit about that, especially Tim. That's you, right? Getting hit with all those waves.
It really is, and it's like someone I know had said, it's like the perfect storm. You're getting hit from every different direction, from technology, from people, from lack of people, people who want to be remote, don't want to be remote, and so it's really, like you said, any one of those things together, I think, is easier to deal with. But when you're getting hit with them simultaneously, you really have to put a strategy together to deal with them all simultaneously. You can't just focus on one, because if you focus on one, you're going to get out of sorts on the other one.
Yeah.
So I think it's really been about, measuring the technology, the implementation of technology, while also taking into account both the people that you have, but also the skill sets.
Yeah.
And really trying to upskill the teams from historical scorekeepers to business partners, and also trying to find ways to get more talent in as the labor market, especially in accounting, not as many students graduating in accounting and finance as there used to be.
Yeah, I think the really interesting takeaway about conferences like this, and the great thing about going to AICPA events as well, is oftentimes I think in organizations we get so caught up in thinking like, my industry is different, or my company is different. We're very, very special, and it's really great when you sit in these rooms with CFOs and transformation leaders and all these high finance people in different industries, across different types of business, and we're talking about like government, nonprofit, private enterprise that's both public and privately owned, and they're dealing with a lot of the same things. Yeah. It's and the idea, the pressures on CFOs becoming more strategic, and a lot of them aren't waiting for the CEO to delegate that down to them. Right. They're seeing the opportunity to better their organization, and they're taking it upon themselves. And what does that mean for their organization and sort of that trusted group of lieutenants underneath them to get them in that delegation ready state to really move the whole organization forward? That's the fascinating piece to me.
Absolutely.
And I think, this was in the opening keynote, but I think it was all about, this is a time of huge opportunity for us finance leaders. The stuff about what's getting automated, even with AI or not, the notion of autonomous finance, right? I think you said something like 65% of your CFOs are saying we'll be there in like 6 years. Isn't that the stat?
Right.
So think about that though. When we I remember I was back in the days when we had a mini computer and it took us weeks to close the books, right? So the CEO's going like, what's happened? I'm like, I can't get the final numbers out for 3 weeks. So that would be, so now the close is happening in literally days at worst. And that means we have a chance to actually use our brains the way we were taught, which is to interpret the numbers and tell the story to the company, right?
Exactly, and the data's fresher.
Yeah.
So you can react on it much quicker today than you ever could before. And with some of the things that are coming out, it's going to enable companies to react even faster than they are today.
Yeah. So let's double click a bit into the human side, because we spent a little bit of time talking about that. I know we were talking about yesterday, like going back to work and all that stuff. Talk a little bit about what you guys are seeing. So I think you guys went back to work.
We did go back to work. Part of it was felt that interaction with folks on a day-to-day basis was important, as well as really being able to develop the younger folks. Much harder to develop people when you're online.
Yeah.
But there's a tight balance there.
Yeah.
Especially as you look at what a lot of folks want to do after they've been working from home for 3 years and have made it work. So, I think that's going to be a continued challenge for a lot of people is how do you balance that work with people wanting some more flexibility, and even more so than what they may have had even before the pandemic.
I know. So what we're hearing from our Future Finance group is it's about purpose, like being intentional. So don't just say come back to work because we want you back to work so we can see you. It's like, because then they're back at work doing Zoom meetings, right? And so like that's ridiculous.
Right.
But if you come in for team building, or you come in for strategic planning, or some kind of way of building your talent, training.
So I think that's a big thing that I've been hearing. How about what you guys are hearing at Gartner?
So we at Gartner started looking at, hybrid models of work even before the pandemic, and that sort of accelerated a lot of that research. And we have a lot of good research that, talks about how to be productive and like those specific issues too. How do you mentor from a distance, and how do you build team culture and enhance collaboration when you're not in the office together? So there's a bunch of different ways to do it. I think it's funny you took the words right out of my mouth. I think intentionality is the key thing there, right?
Yeah.
Because it's all about, you got to put yourself in terms of like, what's the employee value proposition that I'm presenting, right? And the employee is going to think about it, the what's in it for me aspect of it. Like, what's the value of going to work versus working from home, and instilling that, the value, not just the organization, but to the employee in terms of the culture you want to bring and all that stuff. It's that it has to have a purpose, right?
Yeah, exactly. So now let's go to how are we maintaining our, for all morale and team spirit in light of all this transformation stuff, right? So how are we dealing with change fatigue? That was a topic, a couple of sessions here, we're talking about that idea. Any thoughts right away from that, Marko?
Yeah, so when we talk about, the sort of the changing nature of the employee, right? Like, we're finally reaching this whole idea of human capital, right? That your employees are assets that you need to manage, and within that human capital, it's really you start thinking about things like mental energy, right? Like it's not just the number of people you have and the work that they're doing; it's how engaged they are and how enthusiastic, because that makes a difference in terms of the output that they have, their willingness to stay, and all of that stuff. So being able to manage that appropriately, in this age of increasing demands on productivity and utilizing technology and constant change is really what we have to look out for in terms of finance leaders.
Yep, absolutely. And really what we've found is the ways to get employees engaged that worked in the past may not necessarily work today. So it's up to the leaders within finance and throughout the organization to find different ways to get the employees engaged, and whether that be through lunches, we've done like lunch and learns, and there's the host of ways, but you've got to try different ways, and I think it's one of the items that you've got to get some input from your teams.
Yeah,
find out what motivates them, what they're interested in, but then also being very open with them, being very real with them about what we're trying to do with technology, not trying to replace people, trying to let them focus on more value add activities and less of the number crunching.
And it's interesting. This conversation in itself is fascinating, because think of what we're talking about. We're talking about the CFO as cultural leader within the organization, right?
Yeah.
It used to be we were head of the function and we kind of scorecard up as to what's going on, and we were really responsible for the way people worked underneath us and the culture within finance. Now we're talking about culture writ large,
right?
And the CFO as one of the key people that sets the culture at the organization. Like, that changing role of the CFO, it just keeps getting deeper and deeper and deeper.
Right? It's gotten so much more, right? And that idea of, so in our future finance group, they've been talking about creating the vision for finance. So you have the corporate vision, and then you create your vision for finance underneath of that. Get your people involved in creating that vision. That's part of creating that future, if you will, helps them buy in. And then you start to set the culture that you want to help to accomplish that, right? The moving into this finance business part. That's the other concept I've heard a whole bunch at this conference. We've been hearing it all over the place in our future finance and the work that we're doing, even in the middle market CFO community. They're all seeing the opportunity and the demand by the CEOs to help them run that business.
Right.
So this is where they're becoming the co-pilot with the CEO, right?
Right.
Yeah. So I think that's exciting. That's where there's tons of opportunity. And what do you think, Tim? How, you are one of those finance business partners. Any advice for the audience out there about what helped you get to that point?
I really think the key thing is embracing change. That's whether we like it or not. That's probably the one constant, ironically, that we're going to have going forward is change.
And it's accelerating.
Exactly. And embracing that change. Don't be afraid to look at things in a different way. Don't be afraid to do things a little bit differently. And, by doing that, I think it will also give you more comfort, more happiness with what you're doing, but then also help you move that change along.
Yeah. So I got to channel one of our future finance folks, and I'm sure if he's watching, he'll be laughing out there. David DeFreitas, who was the former group CFO for Caterpillar. They had a huge, humongous finance team. And he said he learned early on that he doesn't call it change. He doesn't call it change management, doesn't call it change leadership. He calls it improvement. We're actually working on improving our capability, right? That's what this stuff is. When you're doing transformation in finance, you're improving the way we're working and the value we're creating for the business. If we communicate that, that's kind of inspiring, as opposed to another conversion, another, right?
Yep.
Right. So this is about improving what we're doing, not changing what we're doing.
Right.
I like that. I think that one's kind of
And
sticky.
even transforming what we're doing, right? Doing things we've never done before that we never thought were possible.
Right. And that's a whole different game. And I think that's what we have to start embracing from that standpoint. All right, let's do final thoughts. Any final pieces of advice you want to give to the audience? Marko, I'm going to go to you first.
Well, I think the final piece of it is, like I said, it's the intentionality. Let's not lose sight of the fact that we're people, like wherever you are, it doesn't matter if you're a service organization, a manufacturing organization, a nonprofit, we are a people first organization in finance, and let's not lose sight of that going forward.
Yeah.
And I absolutely agree with Marko, and I really think it's a part of, as a people leader, being empathetic to your people, understand what's on their mind, be honest with them, be open, and really listen to what they have to say to help you make those decisions.
So it's funny because in that opening session, right, the two big skill sets were authenticity and empathy. And I think that's something, you never thought about. We have to try to train ourselves on that, but those are skills that you can get better at, and we probably need to focus on that as leaders, because that creates the tone inside your culture, and I think really makes a big difference. It's just interesting that we're at the Gartner conference, which you expense all about technology, and I bet you, I want to say probably half, maybe a third of the agenda has a lot to do with these human pieces, right? Everything from DEI to how do you be that authentic, empathetic leader, right? All those kind of pieces, and lead improvements. That would be my final thing, thanks to David. So with that, signing off from National Harbor here. Thank you all for listening.
Thank you.
Thank you.